Welcome to What's in a Game. We're fresh off the Nuggets playing competent basketball and making it a 2-1 series officially. So the series that everybody wanted, we may actually be getting if these teams can actually come out and keep playing competent basketball and keeping their composure. We may even get a game where both teams keep their composure. Yes,
Competent basketball was played.
Confident basketball is played, but we'll go over that and we're going to do a cherry picking segment where we'll talk about some of the other games going around the playoffs, and then we'll lastly rank our agendas on a fun little segment where you can get to know some of our biases, biases more. But let's check in with the rest of the playoffs and the series score. Do you want to run through it, Grace?
Yeah, so like Will said, the Nuggets went into Minnesota in game 3 and made this a series in a pretty dominant game. The only game in the playoffs where I felt like the Nuggets looked good for 48 minutes. Probably the first game in a while where I felt like they looked good for 48 minutes, but especially in the postseason. The Dallas Mavericks, since our last episode, took a game off of OKC in Oklahoma City, and went into Dallas in game 3 and gutted out a close game against the Thunder. The Knicks, after taking a 2-0 lead in the series, got outplayed in Indiana by the Pacers. Some really interesting adjustments from both teams in that game 3, but the Pacers were the ones who emerged victorious in another clutch game for the New York Knicks. It's funny because I feel that ever since really game 1 of the playoffs, after that point, the Pacers have looked largely like early season Pacers where you're like, oh my God, this defense, but they're scoring like crazy. And also it's fun to watch because both teams can score rather easily. And the Knicks have been giving us fun basketball all playoffs because they cannot not play a close game down the stretch. Like Nick Nurse said, I believe it was after a crazy game 5 that kept the Sixers season alive before the Knicks closed them out. It didn't matter if the Knicks out-rebounded them or if Philly won the rebounding battle. It didn't matter if they limited their turnovers or if they turned the ball over a lot. It didn't matter if they scored well or if they didn't score well, particularly shooting well, because every single game came down to the wire in that series. And Nick Nurse, with that big nihilism energy, was perhaps foreshadowing the rest of the Knicks playoff run, because I don't think they've played a game that wasn't close this entire playoffs. But it makes for fun basketball between these two teams because of the way that they kind of come together to give us elite hoops. And then in the Cavs-Celtics series, after a dominant showing in game 1 by the Celtics, Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley carry the Cavs to a blowout win over the Boston Celtics in the Garden to tie the series up at 1-1. And we're recording this right before game 3. So, yeah, well, what are your thoughts on where some of these other series lie?
I mean, I'm pretty surprised that Cleveland won. I wasn't sure. I don't remember what I picked this series to be, whether I picked Celtics to sweep, but you would feel like the Celtics should take a convincing command of the series because they're the Celtics and they looked amazing all season. But Donovan Mitchell's been playing really well. And yeah, it's kind of crazy to think that the Cavs won a game on the Celtics and they went to a game 7 with the Magic. Like, what would have happened if the Magic actually moved on and they were playing the Celtics? Would they have won a game on the Celtics?
I would have fully expected the Magic to be swept.
Completely swept.
But I think
so weird.
Even though we're not going to go into those games in depth as much, just a couple of bullet points that I think were important. A lot of people are pointing out how Boston didn't shoot well from 3 in that game. I think they shot only 30% in game 2. But I thought the Cavs were very intentional of employing the same strategy that the Heat did in the game 2 that they won against Boston, where they were largely letting Tatum and Brown, although it was a lot more Tatum than Jalen from my recollection of game two, play more one on one and limiting Boston's 3 point attempts as much as possible. And so I think the Celtics only ended up with, what was it, 30 or 32 3 point attempts, which is well below their uh, average, well below what they'd like to get up in a game, just closer to like well above 40. And then Donovan Mitchell was absolutely cooking them. I think again, because what he did in game two really confirmed how I felt about the point of attack defenders on the Celtics. Drew Holiday shouldn't be guarding ones and twos. Drew Holiday was on Donovan Mitchell a lot in this game. He's too shifty, he's too quick. And Drew, in his current at his current stage in his career, he struggles with those high level guards. That's why Tyler Hero burned him in that game too, and it's why the Celtics started just making others beat them. But later in that Heat series, they were also rotating out to the guys that were shooting. And in this game, Donovan Mitchell, they had no answer for Donovan Mitchell. It wasn't just Drew. He's also just too strong for Derek White. He's too shifty and good off of screens for Tatum or Brown, who are not the best screen navigators on that team. And so I do think that there's an archetype of player that gives that Celtics team some issues. There are actually two, because Evan Mobley really went off in this game. You saw the issues that the Celtics have guarding interior size, especially with Kristaps out right now with the calf strain. And so Cleveland was really, I think, scoring with ease. And when it wasn't Donovan Mitchell making tough shots, it was Donovan Mitchell generating great shots for everybody. The only Cavs, I think, who didn't look comfortable were Darius Garland, but again, I don't think it was because of how Boston was guarding him. I think Darius just like struggles to get the ball in the basket. He is even quicker and even shiftier than Donovan, so he was able to get to his spots with ease against the Celtics defense. But both his jump shot and the issues that he has with finishing at the rim just made it impossible for him to be effective once he got to those spots. So it was a lot of just Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley carrying the day. And Derek White was not as good, both with shooting the ball and with decision making in this game. But it's interesting, right? You see what happens when Derek White has a bad game on the Celtics versus like Tatum's had some pretty subpar games before this one, and he still didn't shoot well in this one, but he was a lot more aggressive. He was definitely taking advantage of the fact that Cleveland was giving him so many mismatches. But I find it interesting that this is what the team looks like when Derek White, in particular, isn't having a good game.
It's hard to imagine the Celtics going and just running away with the title right now because they look kind of just so much less impressive than what the expectations were and what the regular season laid them out to be with all of the data and their point differential. And I still hadn't given up on them. I mean, we don't know how the Nuggets Wolves are going to go. We're both leaning towards a Western Conference team to win the finals, I think, even though the Celtics are massively favored. But I think back to that Heat game that they won, the Heat are way less talented than the Cavs right now. I mean, because they have injuries and all that. But the Celtics played really bad defense in that game. It wasn't just that they jacked up threes and they got lucky. They did such a bad job defending the perimeter. And so, yeah, I'm wondering, are they going to respond similarly as last series and like really lock down on their defense or figure stuff out? Because we know they have good defensive habits. But I don't know. Yeah, like you said and like you laid out, maybe they are going to have a tougher time taking control in this series than they did against the Heat because the Cavs present some actual problems. It's not a matter of just trying harder. So we'll see.
I think the Celtics are beatable, but I think very few teams have the ingredients necessary to stop them, which, in my opinion, are uh, offensive players, at least one, but ideally two, that take advantage of their specific weak points defensively, and two, the ability to uh, execute a game plan that limits their 3 point attempts. Not even like obviously it helps if they don't shoot well on the attempts they take, but the ability to limit their 3 point attempts makes their offense more mortal and gives you a chance to stay in those games. To me, the most elite, I've been saying this, the most elite part about the Boston Celtics this entire season has been their defense. And it's not because of any um, one player, but the fact that everybody on that team is an overall plus defender. So in my mind, if you can take advantage of them defensively and then make their offense mortal, you really take away the thing that makes them the title favorite, right? And you could say that about any team, but obviously we're saying it about the Celtics because they had this historic regular season, one of the best regular season teams that we've ever seen by all of the metrics. But the playoffs are about uh, doing things that make you uncomfortable. And in the regular season, they were allowed to do all of the things that they're good at and
Hmm.
excel in those areas. But yeah, no, I think that they're going to win this series because there are ways to make anybody but Donovan Mitchell beat you. And I don't think that this Cavs team is necessarily constructed uh, or at least well equipped right now. In particular, with the Dean Wade injury, looms over this series just because they don't have great options at the four with Jarrett Allen also injured. But
Yeah.
at the same time, Jarrett Allen's injury has opened the floor up a lot more for Evan Mobley. I kind of said this right before, I think he got injured before game 6 against Orlando, that a lot of people were thinking, oh, this might be the end of the series for the Cavs. But to me, it's like, well, maybe him being out just makes their offense make more sense just because of the spacing. But yeah, this Cavs team is not equipped to really challenge the Celtics for more than I think a game, maybe two. Um, just because Boston has they are a very versatile team. They have lots of counters. They're going to figure this out. But you saw those weaknesses come to the forefront in this game because it's not like shooting 30% from three shouldn't automatically mean that you get blown out if you have other things that you can go to, and in particular if you can stop the other team. But to me it was like the Celtics inability to stop the Cavs because they scored 118 points on them,
Hmm.
which was even worse than the game where Miami beat them in Boston shooting like 50% from three.
Right. Well, speaking of defense and whether or not a team is going to figure out another team, let's jump into Nuggets Wolves game 3, where the Nuggets finally responded, looked energized. They played with intensity, they played with physicality. We had been questioning whether they were going to get to another level or another gear because they had looked not quite themselves so far in the playoffs, especially in the Lakers series, and hadn't looked at all like themselves in this Wolves series. But they won. Their largest lead was 34 points, which was pretty awesome. They asked Jokic after the game what kind of adjustments or whatever they made, and Jokic's answer was getting the ball up the floor quicker, like getting over the
Yeah,
half court in two to
I
three
mean I think
seconds.
that's a
That's all we did.
pretty big tactical adjustment. I'd classify that
Yeah.
as a big one.
Along with the video montage that Malone said that he made of all the big basketball analysts and personalities talking shit about the Nuggets, the biggest storyline to me was just how much separation Jamal got, setting up the screens. Because I know we talked a lot about Jokic setting harder screens, and people were debating whether they were offensive fouls or not. Even Aaron Gordon tried to set some harder screens. I think Jaden had a better time getting around AG screens than Jokic's, but Murray did a really good job setting up the screen, whether he's like being aggressive with Ant or whoever it was, and then dribbling around the screen. And we knew the story of the series was going to be how we were going to create space for Jamal and if he was going to be able to do it or not.
Right after I think it was the second home game against the Warriors this season. Malone was talking about KCP's defense, and he said the goal of a great player is to create space, and the goal of a great defender is to not let them create that space, right? And that can be true for a defense as well. So in this game, I saw basically every tactical adjustment that the Nuggets did not do in games one and two that people talked about both before the series started and after game one is what they made in this game. And it was all about creating space for Yoke and Maul. Like you said, getting the ball up the floor quicker was huge just because it wasn't even about getting into their sets necessarily, although that helped to get into things before, uh, you know, 10 seconds left on the shot clock because especially in game two, the Nuggets were forced into a lot of late clock situations. And yeah, it was good half court defense, but part of it was that the full court defense was keeping the Nuggets from even getting anything started, whether it was a set, pick and roll, whatever they wanted to do earlier in the clock. So in this game, like you said, AG was bringing the ball up the floor a lot more. I think it was easier for him to do it in this game than last because Gobert was in and he was going to be playing all the way back. He was going to be just getting back every time. So AG wasn't getting full court pressured. But I also don't think they attempted all that to let him initiate all that much in game two. And I don't know why that is. I was arguing with someone on Twitter about why they were even dribbling the ball up the floor in game two when they could pass
Hmm.
it up. So
Yeah.
it was getting the ball across half court was there were like three different things that the Nuggets did throughout this game just to get that done. And that was big just because of time. It was letting AG bring the ball up so he was not getting full court pressure, so he could just dribble up largely freely. When Jamal was bringing the ball up, Yoke and AG were constantly setting screens for him. They had Christian bringing
Hmm.
the ball up a couple times too, and I think the team they tried a couple of no point guard minutes, and I think the team was like very acutely aware of the issue of having Christian in particular bring the ball up in those no point guard lineups. So they were having, especially Jokic, but I think I saw some possessions where AG was also just walking alongside him, making sure that he had a good screen set so that, Nickeil Alexander Walker is not poking the ball away from Christian Brown as he tries to um, bring the ball up against this set Wolves defense, which we thought, oh, they're not going to use no point guard lineups against this team because you just can't do that. But there are other ways to counter it, right? It doesn't always have to be Christian bringing the ball up either. Jokic was bringing the ball up in those lineups sometimes. And you don't always have to dribble the ball up the floor. The other thing they did consistently, particularly off of misses, but also off of makes, was we're trying to get the ball up the floor as quickly as possible, not even necessarily to try to create a fast break opportunity or get a quick score, but just to make sure that the ball is advanced up the floor quicker so that we can get into our half court offense
Hmm.
easier. And in this game, the Nuggets were pretty good in transition, but it was really their half court offense that flourished just because they were able to
Hmm.
do that, in addition to a couple of other um, adjustments that they made to the Wolves half court defense, which
Yeah.
maybe you want to talk about. But yeah, what do you think of
Right.
just the
Yeah.
pace?
I mean, I just for NBA teams, you should have already understood how to figure out how to get the ball to the floor. And Jamal missed easy passes when he was bringing it up in game two that he could have just made. The whole game two was a complete disaster, right?
A
It was
shit
like
show?
it was a mental collapse. So it's hard to say like, why couldn't you do this in this game when it's like there is so many other
There
things
was
going
so
on.
much, like so many things
Um,
they weren't doing.
Once they did get into the half court, like you were saying, I liked the patience is a word I was kind of thinking where when Jokic is trying to throw a lob to AG and we've seen Rudy disrupt that one that he disrupted in game one, Jokic was kind of far out and he kind of rushed it and he was kind of far out in the lane. And I think sometimes the Nuggets players, when they're getting to these spots against the Wolves, because they know they're swarming and they're long and they can put back pressure and they can have rear contests, sometimes look like they were trying to like just rush the shot up because they're like, I have to be quick because these Wolves defenders are quick. But this time, Jokic threw a lob up to AG, and I think he knew Gobert was going for it, and it wasn't the best lob. And instead of like just trying to go up for the shot and maybe get a foul or maybe try to like put up a like alley oop layup essentially, because I don't think he was going to dunk it, he just like hit it back out. and then we got the ball
I saw
again.
that. I wasn't sure
Yeah.
if it was Yoke or AG who hit it because it was almost, I couldn't tell who it was. I would have believed that either of them had enough wherewithal to see that Rudy was going to like block that. So
Hmm.
they're like, let's tap it out because we have like
Yeah.
three Wolves collapsed on us. One of our guys on the perimeter is going to get the ball. I remember the exact possession you were thinking
Yeah.
of.
Oftentimes we just had more time to realize that this wasn't a good look and we're going to reset or rescreen or pass it back out or whatever it is. And I like that we didn't force it as much. So we could kind of play the right way and play the Nuggets way or play the Jokic way, but we didn't have to rush it as much.
I actually disagree a little bit with your overall conclusion about it being more about patience. There were some possessions that were like good, deliberate offense that they were afforded in large part because they were starting each possession with more than 10 seconds left on the shot clock. So that was nice. But I think the thing that stood out more to me in this game compared to both games 1 and 2, especially in the starters' minutes, is the decisiveness. There were a lot fewer of those possessions where they're second guessing everything when they have the ball, particularly whoever has the ball. I think that both MPJ and KCP were a lot more decisive when they were attacking the closeouts or taking shots. Like there was one where just, and it just tells you like the value of having KCP even when he's not making shots, where he was so, he had such a quick trigger off of a corner three that Mike Conley just like lunges at him and fouls KCP behind the 3 point line. MPJ was really decisive when he was attacking the closeouts on him. Part of it was because of the spacing they were able to establish too, where they went with a couple some slightly different alignments in this game, where there was less of AG in the dunker, and I usually don't love it. He also would lurk the baseline, but it wasn't like he was starting in that dunker spot, so the paint was a lot less clogged for most of it. But it also created more space for all five starters in particular, but really in all the lineups to be able to play that read and react offense with decisiveness without worrying about the Wolves playing the passing lanes and clogging everything up. So I thought that the passing being that decisive really neutralized a lot of the Wolves' advantages in the way that they overhelp,
Yeah.
particularly on drives and at the rim. And it wasn't just like, oh, they're overhelping, getting this to the corner. Not just that decision, because then the Wolves could still recover out to that person. That person knows, like, okay, I'm driving, like I'm attacking this closeout. And if I draw somebody else, I'm immediately making that next easy read. And that flow state with the offense continued throughout the game, even during a couple of short stretches when the Nuggets weren't scoring. They were getting good shots. The only person I think who struggled shooting wise in this game was actually Yoke. And I think by the end of the game, like he'd been having some trouble with like Nas Reed one on one at the beginning, but they were
Yeah.
able to like create more space for him. And he, I think, figured a couple things out by the end of it.
Yeah, he actually didn't have a great shooting first half. Because he was trying to do a lot of over the top shots or like jump shots over Nas, and he wasn't even like really trying
Oh
to
my God, the jump
challenge
shot
Nas.
is dead. It's very
Yeah,
sad.
he wasn't trying to challenge him at all, but in the second half, he was definitely being more aggressive, just going around him or creating better opportunities for himself. Like, the flow state and everything you described is that's basically what I mean with patience, and maybe that's the wrong word, but it's just like if AG got the ball inside or he got an offensive rebound, he wasn't just going up and letting the Wolves block him or whatever. He was passing the ball back out, or Mike wasn't
Yeah.
ISOing Rudy. He was giving the ball to Jamal and then run a set and then the ball goes back to him and then he can shoot it for three. So just not making the same mistakes that they made in the other games and just giving themselves better looks. And I think that was why I was confident we were going to win this series was I believed in the Nuggets' ability to get better looks on offense. As good as the Wolves' defense is, then the Wolves were going to be able to get on offense. Both teams need to play really good defense in this series. Nuggets played good defense last night in the game. It wasn't perfect. I saw KCP lose dudes like off back cuts, and I saw some other like random mistakes. But for the most part, we were so much better, and Jokic was better guarding at the level of the screen. Even like kind of ran out and tried to contest Mike Conley on some threes. I was kind of surprised by Conley's night because he was 1 of 5 for 3, and I went and looked at his
I know.
threes, and a lot of them were open and he just missed. So
Yeah.
that was a little concerning. I'm thinking in the next game he's going to be very determined to make more of his shots. And that was just something in general I was thinking about when I was looking at this game and like the stats and looking at the plays was whether or not the Nuggets really did hit kind of their peak, because this was like the first good game, quote unquote, that we've played in this playoffs, because we won and it was, we were never trailing in the game by a huge margin. But when I was looking back at it, it wasn't like the best game we've ever played either. And I know people
No.
are talking a lot about the 3 point percentage, which is pretty low volume, including a couple threes that were in garbage time. KCP didn't make a three. Murray wasn't shooting as good early on, same with Jokic, but he just had spots. Obviously, Murray had a much better game than we've seen in a long time. So he did a really good job and did a good job getting space for himself to be able to make shots, but it wasn't like he was like bubble Murray or even the Murray of last finals either. So I feel encouraged just because I still feel like we have room to keep playing better. And if you do believe in the sentiment that Jokic gets better as series go on, hopefully we can just keep building from this. I know the Wolves are going to play really hard next game. Ant's going to try to drive more. Cat's going to have more attempts because he only had one attempt in the second half, which was really bizarre.
Really? That's what
Yeah.
it felt like. They should have kept feeding Cat because, like, I know we have AG on him, but we just don't really have a good matchup on Cat. And I
Hmm.
felt like the Wolves left a lot of meat on the bone in
Yeah.
that sense. I do think that with respect to how much better the Nuggets can be. A lot of it for me is more on the defensive side. Like Jokic could shoot a little bit better, but
Hmm.
like you said, there were a lot of open threes that were given to the Wolves in this game. I think they started off the game taking too many threes. A lot of people on Twitter also pointed that out because I know the Nuggets were loading up on a lot of drives, to be fair, but I just think there was just a more defensive emphasis on the paint. But Ant is usually still able to knife in anyway, especially when he's off the ball. When he's initiating, it's a little bit tougher when the Nuggets are loading up like they did in this game. They were trying to make him more of a passer when he was further out on the perimeter. But if they get Ant attacking off the catch on something, like it's curtains on that possession because they're going to score, whether it's a layup because he is like one of the best finishers I know of in the league right now, or he's going to get free throws. But yeah, a lot of it, the Wolves jump shooting wasn't good, but I also think they relied on it quite a bit much in this game. I do wonder how the Nuggets are going to how or if the Nuggets are going to adjust anything defensively scheme wise. I think KCP did a lot of playing off of Ant. He hit a couple of threes, I think, early in this game. He and Cat were really the only Wolves who could shoot from three. So KCP was playing the drive a lot more, and I don't know that I necessarily agree with that strategy when he's behind the 3 point line. I think it's fine once you get him in and then you kind of force him into the midi, which he can still make, but we're just like living with that and trying to play the math game. The Nuggets also did a lot. They continued their strategy of just trying some possessions with AG on Ant, and they would kind of put AG on Ant and also load up because I think Ant is just too quick to leave him on an island with basically anybody, but especially AG of all the different defenders that we try on him. I thought Christian Brown did a really good job for his limited stint on Ant, and really like the only question with him on the floor is his contribution to the offense. The nice thing about him in this game is that even though he wasn't taking a lot of shots, he did make one big three, I think, but he was also really decisive with his passing in the offense and his screening. Like he was a really good screener in this game, and he's generally a pretty good one. And I know he and Jamal talk a lot about all the specifics about how like Jamal likes his screens set, angles, timing, and all of that. So I think that was also really helpful. The bench, even though they were great in game one, they were the only reason that the Nuggets were even in that game. I thought they continued to be excellent defensively in this game. Offense stalled out a couple of times, especially when the Wolves wanted to blitz Jamal. I think they need to just run some different plays when they have in particular, when they have MPJ on the floor with Jamal, like there's just stuff you could do that you weren't doing where you're like spacing MPJ on the weak side. And I'm like, yeah, Wolves are blitzing because Jamal's not going to make a skip pass from the opposite corner to the opposite corner from half court. So I do think that there's meat on the bone really for both teams, and game 4 is going to be really interesting. How do you feel about the fact that the Nuggets like finally played well in this game?
I
Because I'm
mean,
pretty conflicted about it, to be honest.
well, I mean, obviously, I'm happy they played well. Are you conflicted because you don't think they're going to keep playing well, or what
No,
is
I'm
your
conflicted because I'm
conflict?
annoyed that they waited
Mm,
this long into the playoffs to play well, this long into the series to play well, in
yeah.
particular the starters, because I really haven't had too much negative
Hmm.
to say about the bench throughout the entire playoffs. But the starters have had, like I said in
Yeah, they
our
played the
therapy
worst.
session in our last episode, that they've
Hmm.
had these really slow starts, particularly offensively, tons of turnovers, just timing was off, everything was just off. And it got amplified in this Wolves series, but particularly in game 2 of this Wolves series. Game 3 comes around and you're like, oh, this team is actually good. And in particular, good offensively. Because I think this is the most points that they scored all
Mm.
playoffs
Yeah,
against this Wolves defense. And it wasn't like they shot well, but they shot even better in some other games from 3. They weren't great in the Lakers series until like I think game 5. And they shot well I think, shot well from 3 in one of the first 2 games against the Wolves. But it was more just the process was so crisp and the decisiveness. Like
yeah,
it just felt like everyone was connected. And then it was like they're going on these big runs because the defense is showing up at the same time as the offense, whereas those things hadn't necessarily been clicking for simultaneously for stretches throughout the first 6 games or 7 games of the playoffs.
I'll touch on the bench and then I'll talk about it. Where it's like, I remember the theme that Malone was kind of sending to the team was how Nas Reed and the Wolves role players like Conley and um, everybody was making an impact on the offensive end, and they were scoring a lot and they were going off. So Malone was saying you can't let all those guys go off. You got to shut down somebody. Whereas in this last game, we got two threes from Justin Holiday, and we got
It
it
felt
wasn't
like
like
more. He's been
yeah,
really impactful in this
it
series.
wasn't like the bench went crazy like the
Yeah.
Wolves players did in game 1, but I feel like we finally got a game where our other players, even the starters, obviously all the starters played pretty well, but Christian Brown had good defense and Justin Holiday played some pretty good defense and hit some shots. And Reggie hit, I don't think he hit a three, but he hit like a kind of cool pull up jump shot that was nice. So we got some good production from them, which I liked. But in regards to just the whole scene of this playoffs where the starters haven't been playing well, and we've been speculating as Nuggets fans what's going on. Is there something in the locker room? Is Jokic tired? Does he not want to play? Are Jamal and Jokic getting along? There's been all these questions and rumors, and it's all just fan speculation and panic because the Nuggets are down. They've lost 2 home games in a row, which is not typical of them, and they haven't looked like their typical selves. So I think the biggest thing is just talking about and thinking about motivation, where it's really hard for any team to repeat. So they had a long offseason. Everyone was talking about how exhausted maybe they were, and reporters and journalists were asking Jokic, "How do you stay motivated?" They've been asking like Murray, "How do you stay motivated?" And we know Murray's injured, and we don't necessarily know the answers to those questions. I mean, Jokic said winning, is kind of a standard answer. I
Do we know
believe,
those answers to those questions for basically anybody except, well,
nah.
actually any player in the NBA?
No, I think it's more of like a game to game motivation. Like clearly, the Wolves were motivated coming out in this series. They destroyed the Suns. They had all the confidence in the world. They weren't as banged up. The Nuggets were banged up. Kind of like it was a shorter series with the Lakers, but it's a tough series. Like it was a close game. A lot of comebacks they had to make, and they're banged up.
Yeah,
So
because of their slow starts.
yeah, and now the Nuggets are, they were more hungry in game 3 because it was kind of like do or die. Like they were more desperate. So now we're in the situation where it looks like the Wolves are going to come in angry. I'm hoping the Nuggets keep up their motivation and the intensity that they had received from whether it was Malone or whether it was from Jokic's texts or whether it was from just, you know, practice and study, reflection, whatever it is that they did. I hope they can keep it up. But we're finally going to get a game, I think, where both teams are going to be super motivated.
I I'm not gonna lie. After the way that the Wolves came out in game two, I was kind of expecting a similar effort because in game two, I thought it might be just a little bit easier on the Nuggets. Not because Rudy was out, but because the Wolves, like, okay, they got the one they wanted. They won game one, and now the Nuggets need to respond at home. But the Wolves came out, like I said in our last episode, just ready to pounce on the Nuggets and viciously attack their faces. And that's what happened. And that's the way that game two played out. I kind of thought, okay, here comes game three. And we saw how they were against Phoenix in that sweep, that they were like, no, we're not letting any of these games go. Like, we were trying to prove a point. And they came out with a lot of energy in all of these games. And yeah, the Nuggets are better than the Suns, but it looked like the Wolves were just not prepared for the force that the Nuggets came out with in game three, and just never, after that started, they just never really found their groove. You mentioned how Ant was just a little more passive in this game. Cat didn't have he only had one shot attempt in the second half. That's shocking to me because it felt like he was cooking us every time he touched the ball. And the
Yeah.
Nuggets were like, we can't go down 3-0 because that's just unacceptable. I hope they don't want to go down 3-1 in game four. But you're
Hmm.
right. I think game four is going to be an interesting inflection point in the series because while I mean, I wasn't around for it. I know the Nuggets have come back from 3-1 deficits before, but this Wolves team is better than either of those teams, the bubble Clippers or the bubble Jazz, for sure. You don't want to go down 3-1 to them. You and I both said after the Nuggets went down 2-0 against this Wolves team, like, man, winning 4 out of 5 against them is, I see, as basically impossible. I no longer see it as impossible for the Nuggets to win this series, but I am probably going to write them off if they lose game four because even they finally showed me in game three, like, okay, they can be a good enough team to win this series, even though they've put themselves in this, now it's a 2-1 hole. But if it becomes 3-1, I think the Wolves are just too good to let a 7 game, uh, 3-1 comeback happen to them, even if it is like as good as the Nuggets can be. I just don't see that happening. And that's why I'm pretty annoyed that it took this long for the real Nuggets to, show up and raise their hands.
Yeah, I think I'll feel better if the Nuggets do end up losing, knowing that at least we played a single game pretty well and we won, like we didn't get
Yeah.
swept. I'm hoping we play more games, but it just hasn't happened yet. But if we lose, we can kind of blame the Nuggets and say, like, you guys messed around in the first two games. So
Yeah.
you kind of have yourselves to blame. Whereas before this game, I was thinking, wow, are the Wolves just so much better than us? And they're just like crushing our players, and we have no chance against them. We cannot meet their level of physicality. And I had all these questions about our roster and our toughness. And how Tim Connolly has created this team to take down Jokic specifically. Now, there's all these tough existential questions as a team. Whereas now I'm just thinking like the Nuggets can do it. They just have to like put their mind to it and play good defense and actually execute. And I know that some of them are hurt, but Jamal looked good. I'm hoping he still continues to look good. I'm worried that he said that he was feeling tightness at the end of the game, so that's not
I
great.
know.
And then just real quickly, like we don't have to get super into this, but the whole officiating topic, because I feel like both fan bases have been complaining about the refs in these games. Fair, unfair. I mean, it's a thing that all fans do, and Matt Moore is famous for saying every fan thinks that their team gets the worst whistle and all that. So, and I understand that, and I know there's other people who say that talking about the refs is kind of a loser mindset, and that there's nothing we can do about it. It's out of our control. Why are we going to talk about it? But it is kind of dictating a lot of how the series goes, which is kind of problematic to me.
I think it's shaping it. I wouldn't say it's
Yeah, shaping it.
dictating it.
Well, it's like, how are the Wolves going to be able to play defense, and what advantage is that going to give them if they're letting them play as physical in game two? And I'm not saying that the Wolves fouled every single play in game two, but and I think that the Wolves had less intensity in game three. So I think that they can still be intense and not like get a foul called on them every time. Like I'm not saying that's out of the realm of possibility, and they will be more intense, but I just don't want these weird like mind games going on with the league or the refs. And I have no idea if this is happening, but even the Pacers submitted like 70 something like contests on calls in a Knicks game like recently.
I know, and I
Um,
rewatched that game, and I'm like, what are they talking about?
yeah, and I don't know.
Some there were some like things at the end. My thing with the Knicks Pacers series is just this looked pretty consistent, just because of like the thing that was the most like, oh, I wish this was being officiated differently, but it's been consistent for both teams, is just the amount of contact that was allowed on the ball handlers, and it was true for both Halliburton and for Brunson. I actually thought the Bigs got a better whistle in that series than they do in Bulls Nuggets, but the Bigs on both sides actually. But it was consistent across both teams. But it's just like these are clear fouls. You should be calling it for everybody, but they're not calling it for anybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people had been saying that they thought the calls were consistent in each game that we played this series. It's just a matter of
Yeah,
what teams adjusted better, and the Nuggets didn't rise to the physicality and, foul back. So that's their fault. And in this game three, maybe a similar story. I did see some physical plays, though. I mean, Jokic was hitting hard screens. It wasn't like it was some ticky tack game where no contact was allowed. There was some. So I don't know if the
yeah.
Wolves players
There's
are just
certain
confused.
kinds of contact that were okay. We're going to be more ticky tacky with that,
Yeah.
and it was weird. It felt like they were doing more to protect the ball handlers from ticky tackness. But again, in
Which,
this game, I
yeah,
think the bigs got a lot more leeway, and it
leeway.
just happened to be, I think a lot of plays were running through the ball handlers, so it felt like a ticky tack game. When you go back and look at it, there were a lot of things that were just allowed to be more physical. Like if Nikhil Alexander Walker is just allowed to like press up on Jamal, then Yoke's allowed to set a hard screen, especially if Nas and Rudy are just like pushing Yoke into Nikhil as he's fighting through the screen. I'm just like, I think Na has a problem with the bigs on his team. Like that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, I even saw a play where Jaden McDaniels, it was almost like he was setting a flare screen for, I think it was Cat or something. Like Cat, somebody
Hmm.
cut, and then like Cat was cutting through, and then Jaden kind of was setting like a flare little pin in, but it wasn't even a screen. He was just like physically grabbing MPJ and pushing him like he was like a lineman in the
Yeah,
NFL, and just
I
like
hate
pushing him.
those those grabbing screens. Rudy
Yeah.
does it a lot,
I'm
but
confused
they
on
almost
if
never
is
get
that
called.
is that legal? What's the deal with that? But anyways,
It's not supposed to be, but there were
yeah.
also like people complained about the screens. I'm like, the Nuggets got called for a good
Yeah.
number of illegal screens, not just Jokic, but I think
Yeah.
Jamal got called on one where I'm like, I don't even think he made contact there, and he like barely set it and then slipped and like I don't know, like grazed the other guy's arm as he was slipping the screen. It was very so there were also points in the game where those I think that particular call went more against the Nuggets than the Wolves. I'm like, Rudy literally never gets called for his illegal screens. But I
Yeah.
felt like the Nuggets were called, not just Yoke, but the Nuggets were called for illegal screens too. It's
Mhm.
just like, okay, if you're playing physical at the point of attack, then I'm allowed to
Mhm.
set a hard screen. I also don't even think they were moving screens. Any ones that
Yeah.
were like the one that got challenged was because Nas or Rudy like pushed Jokic as he was setting the screen, like pushed him into Na or Jaden, whoever it was on that play. It was interesting. It's just like, okay.
Yeah, I think it was more typical to standard NBA officiating that we're used to, where it's like the ball handlers getting a lot of preferential treatment on contact. But I like the screens. I don't have a problem with them. And I know I'm a Nuggets fan, so people will think I'm biased or whatever. But I like the level of physicality in this game. I thought the Nuggets were being pretty physical. It was definitely less than game two, which I know people were also saying they were a fan of. They really liked how physical the Wolves were. I think I would prefer somewhere maybe in the middle if I could choose like my perfect level of physicality between both those games. But I'm just saying all this to say that I know that the Nuggets and are, they're NBA players, so they're not going to be thinking like this. But the NBA fans, I think, are thinking forward to game four and saying, well, if the refs are going to allow the Wolves to be really physical, we're going to have a tougher time winning. So it's all like dependent on how the refs are going to ref the game. So I'm thinking if I'm the Nuggets, like they got to come out and be very, very physical. and just assume that the refs are going to let some shit go, especially after last game, because I'm sure the Wolves are going to be complaining about these calls. I'm worried about a course correct where the refs are going to now, it's game 4, it's in Minnesota. Are they going to get a home whistle? I don't know. I think home court whistle is kind of a thing, even though it's hard to prove all this. But
I mean, the Nuggets like never get a home whistle, so.
I know,
But yeah,
especially
I believe
like,
you. I think it is a thing for basically every other team.
yeah. So it's just like, I hope the Nuggets just, I don't want them to get in foul trouble because that would be bad. And that's like the
I mean,
hard,
MPJ got in foul trouble in this
yeah.
game. I think like both teams had people in foul trouble within the first
Hmm.
few minutes of this game because of how it was called.
Yeah.
So the last,
Yeah. Go
oh,
ahead.
just the last thing, I'll let you finish, but I just wanted to add to this that the main thing that I would be concerned about with the physicality is Jamal and how much contact is allowed with him, particularly in getting the ball up the floor, but also like stuff in the half court too. But as long as if they're allowing that physicality and Yoke's allowed to set his screens, then it's fine. And if the Nuggets aren't just letting Jamal like slowly dribble the ball up the floor the whole time like they did in game 2, then it's also fine. Which is what I know we had a whole exchange about this on Twitter where I'm like, well, there are lots of counters that the Nuggets used in this game that didn't rely on a change in the whistle to be effective in like getting into their offense
Yeah, which is a great
and stuff like
sign.
that. So
Very good sign for the Nuggets. Yeah, I mean, I don't really
yeah.
have anything else to say other than I'm wondering if they're still going to keep Ant on Jamal as much
I
as
don't
they
think they
did.
should, and I don't know why they kept starting Ant on Malt. They did this in game 1 as well. Maybe this is why, because in game 1, they started him on Jamal, and Jamal was missing the shots, but he was able to create separation off the ball pretty easily. Ant gets lost off ball sometimes. I talked about this when we did our series preview, which is why I was just surprised that they put Ant on Jamal. They didn't want Ant on MPJ for the same exact reasons, as all MPJ does is stuff off the ball, and Ant has to stay super engaged with that, fight over screens and stuff like that. And it's not even just Ant staying engaged, but he's not as good of a screen navigator as Nikhil or Jaden. So they wanted Jaden on MPJ as well. I mentioned in our last show how much emphasis there seemed to be on making sure MPJ didn't get going. And he did in this game, not just because Ant was on him. The Nuggets were just in a flow state on offense, so he got open and got to attack closeouts a lot more in than in game 2. But maybe that's why they keep starting with Ant on Jamal. So they're like, if you can do this, then we can keep Jaden on MPJ and then make sure he doesn't get going, because once he gets going, like this team is just a lot harder to stop. But I just don't think you should. I just don't think you should do that. Like if you really
Yeah.
want to go that direction, and the Wolves wouldn't do this because of their offense, you could put Ant on KCP. KCP, like you could still run him off screens and stuff, but it's just harder. It's just not quite KCP's game to try to shed Ant off the ball. And then play Nikhil on Jamal and then keep Jaden on MPJ. I don't think they want
Yeah.
to do that because you want Mike Conley on the floor. So and the Wolves offense basically falls apart when Mike Conley's not on the floor,
Yeah.
which is still an issue with them. So we kind of saw in game 3, like, okay, this is kind of, even though we didn't expect a blowout. I definitely didn't expect this level of response from the Nuggets, even if they played well. But we
Yeah.
kind of saw the things that we expected to see in terms of the Wolves' weaknesses and the Nuggets' strengths finally in game 3.
Right. Yeah. I expect the Wolves are going to come out and put Jaden on Jamal a lot more, maybe. I think it's time
Oh my
to.
God. Jamal had this sick shot over Jaden off a
Oh, yeah.
screen. I think it was AG who set the screen and Yoke was spaced on the wing. And Jamal created some separation and Jaden kind of recovers, but then Jamal goes to that step back and I'm like, man, this shot is smothered. And the
But he
net
still hit it.
barely moved. I was like,
Yeah.
this guy is amazing.
I can't.
He had that ridiculous shot. Jamal is driving baseline. He gets like right on the baseline, basically. He's behind the backboard, takes this step back. It's basically the same shot that he had over AD, except further out, and the ball has to go over the backboard and swishes into the net. It was ridiculous. Like,
Yeah.
he is
So
such
good.
a special talent.
Imagine if that shot didn't go in and everyone's like, Jamal, what are you doing?
I
but,
know.
but yeah.
That's funny, though. The thing with Jamal's bad shot making games is sometimes he's pressing and he can't create separation. But usually when it's a possession like that, and he's able to get the separation and take the shot, even though it's still a tough shot. Like he just makes it. So
Yeah.
we're like, the bad shooting games aren't the not that the process was bad, but that his execution of it was bad. Like he's just not able to get separation. He's pressing, and that's why he can't make the shot. But which is why we never end up complaining about it like that. Like Jamal, what the heck? Like this
Yeah.
isn't, Tim
Yeah.
Hardaway Jr.
I I
or
can't
whatever.
I can't remember what happened at the end of this play, but there was one where Jamal was kind of running off the baseline, and then AG had the ball at the top, and then it was like a handoff that kind of got into like a little like double screen that Jamal went around, and then he did a scoop layup that he like pushed too hard off
He
the
missed
glass and
that.
just
I was
missed
like,
it.
I wasn't mad at his process on that play. I was just like,
Yeah,
man, I wish that went in. That's
I
how I
can't.
felt. It wasn't like, what are
Yeah,
you doing? It was more like, man, I wish that went in. It looked really, it was like high off the glass too. Because
we
I think it was
missed.
either Cat or Rudy came in late to contest.
Yeah. I feel like we had really good process with Jamal all game. It's just sometimes
Yeah.
it didn't go in. But so I still think he can play better. But I think it's a good sign that like he didn't need to shoot like 70% or 60% from the floor to win. He just had to hit a couple tough ones to get the defense to actually play defense on him, not just stick with Jokic on a roll, or like he needed enough separation to get somebody to step up to stop him that frees up somebody else. Whereas the Wolves hadn't really had to do that. We hadn't really been pressuring them to do that because they were playing such solid defense. They could kind of stay home on a lot of these coverages, and so I liked how we looked, and I hope we keep it up.
I also thought that Jamal did a really good job punishing the Wolves over help. And part of it was helped by the Nuggets spacing with like AG initiating, and you had like sometimes it was Yoke spaced behind 3 point line, and then you also had the guys in the corner. Shout out to Justin Holiday. He only made those two threes, but he made the threes that he needed to make. Where you're like, okay, we got to punish the defense now, and then he would just swish that shot after either Yoke or Jamal passes to him. Jamal did a really great job of finding the guys in the corners once he
Yeah.
collapse the defense. And he was able to do that because he was finally getting downhill in this game. And part of it
Hmm.
is what the Nuggets were doing, setting hard screens, creating more space for him on those drives. But also, he just looked a lot better in this game. I think the thing that stood out to me the most with respect to his health, and I know he said that the calf started to tighten up a little bit toward the end of the game. And Jamal,
Please
please
be
just like
okay.
get better because like we need you to be like decent to win this next game. He was passing really well, and I always felt like it was a Jamal passing series, not because he couldn't make shots over this defense. He did both in this game, but the thing that allowed the offense to keep flowing the way that it was a lot of Jamal both and Jokic both collapsing the defense and getting the ball out to initiate whether it was a driving
Yeah,
kick sequence or just
like
like
swinging the
the more
ball.
sort of random basketball that the Nuggets like to play when they're in this flow state. And that was just really nice to see because I think
Hmm.
Jamal's a pretty good point guard.
Yeah, I hope he keeps it up. But yeah, for Game Four, I'm expecting Ant to. I don't know if the Wolves settled for threes. Maybe you could say that the Nuggets were playing in a specific way that they, could take those shots. And not that they were open, but it's just the way we were guarding like screens. They're gonna try and get into the paint more. I think Cat's gonna be more aggressive and take more shots. Ant's definitely gonna be more aggressive. Ant's gonna be way more alert and physical on defense. So I expect Conley and Nas to at least make more shots than they did. So I think they're gonna be giving their best punch in this game, and we have to also do that. So it's going to be really close, I think. So, but I'll take a 30-point blowout if the Nuggets have it in them to do it. So,
That would
we'll
be
see.
awesome and demoralizing before they go back to Denver. But I don't
Yeah.
think it's going to be a 30-point blowout. I think the Wolves are going to come out with a lot more energy, particularly offensively. Like I feel like they can play better defensively. They obviously did in game 2. Like I think despite like regardless of the whistle, but there weren't a lot of breakdowns in this
Yeah.
game defensively for the Wolves,
Yeah.
which makes me think that it was more about the Nuggets offense improving. So from there, the thing I think that the Wolves need to dial up more is figuring out how they're going to score. We did see. I made note of the way that the Wolves closed the first half, which at one point the Nuggets had gone up like 18 or 19 points with 5 or 6 minutes left or something. And Chris Finch was like, "We need to score some points" because they only had like 34. at that point. And he took Rudy out and he went double big with Cat and Nas to try to just go 5 out and have a ton of offense on the floor. He played them with he closed with like Jordan McLaughlin on the floor, and I'm like, Nuggets, please don't troll away this lead.
Hmm.
And Jordan McLaughlin missed a corner three. He's not like a great 3-point shooter, but it's just one of those things. It's not that they left him open on purpose. It was like a transition drive by Ant, and they forced him to kick out to the corner. And it wasn't like wide open, but it was an open shot. So there's like a lot of shots in my head. I'm playing through this game where I'm like, they could have made that, they could have made that, they could have made that. That like momentum shots. And I think the Nuggets sold out a lot to protect the paint in that game, which is, I think, good to a point. And they did mix some things up here and there, depending on the personnel on the floor and whoever was guarding Ant in particular. But there are definitely ways the Wolves can counter that. I think the other big, I mean, you can't tell the story of this series without talking about turnovers, because we talked in our series preview about how the Wolves are a very efficient offense when they can get a shot up, but they turn the ball over so much, especially live ball turnovers, which fuels the other team's offense. But even just dead ball stuff, shot clock violations, traveling, because they don't have like super high end ball handling, outside of Conley and Ant really, which is why like Reggie was able to get a steal on Nikhil in that first game. So both teams actually have some like limited ball handling, and even though the Nuggets aren't a high turnover team, the Wolves are able to turn them over sometimes. But Nuggets were able to limit their turnovers in this game, and when they did that, they were able to score at a high clip. And the Wolves weren't able to do that, and part of it's because of the way that the Nuggets were clogging things up. They're like, we're not respecting your 5 out spacing. The way they were guarding them was very similar to the way that the Mavs guard OKC when Giddy is on the floor, when they can just clog everything up, and they're like, "Yeah, you're playing 5 out, but we don't believe that you're, we don't, we're not respecting your 5 out space." Or like when the Wolves guard the Nuggets when they have Rudy on AG and he's roaming. AG was able to punish that in this game with some threes, although I don't think that they were big shots at the beginning of the game as they were building the lead, but I don't think you necessarily need that to beat that defense. But the Wolves are going to have to figure out how to tinker with their offense to counter what the Nuggets are doing without making as many mistakes that lead to turnovers like they did in this game. Not just because it fueled Denver's offense, because I don't actually think that the Nuggets got a ton of fast break points in this game, but it's just you don't want to waste the offensive possessions that you have when you're trying to keep up with this team that seems to, in my estimation, figured out ways to break through this really high end defense that the Timberwolves have.
I would also say the Nuggets, I mean, they lost their minds in game two. They were like panicked and frustrated and pissed off and just like not
Yeah.
on the planet Earth in Ball Arena. The Wolves last game were getting killed. Obviously, the Nuggets had a huge lead, but I didn't feel like they were like melting down. I didn't feel like they were like playing super uncharacteristically, whereas like the Nuggets were unrecognizable. I mean,
They got
some of
some
the,
texts. They got upset at the
yeah,
refs a little bit with like certain calls, whatever, but it was not
but that can
like
happen
their
in a
offense
game.
didn't melt down. And they're not a
Yeah,
team that has like it's not that they don't have an offensive identity. Like they like to drive and kick. That's what they do. But I don't think that anything the Nuggets were doing was as like frustrating as what the Wolves were doing to the Nuggets
yeah,
in game two. And I don't mean that as the Wolves were doing anything bad. I think they were playing really good
right.
defense, especially given the whistle that they had.
Yeah.
So I don't think that the Nuggets were like this suffocating, like, we can't do anything against these guys kind of defense. I think they're missing
No.
shots. And then some other process like went off the rails, especially as the game went on.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that this is a good sign for the Nuggets just because I mean the Wolves were flat and I'm just hoping when the Wolves don't play flat, it's still not enough. I guess is what I'm trying to get at, but
Wait, how is
we'll
that
see.
hopeful if they were flat, but they weren't melting
But
down?
but they lost like way worse than well not like point
Oh,
wise.
you mean
You know
like
what I mean?
the margin of victory was the same, or it was bigger, I think, than in game two, even though they didn't actually have like the same similar level of emotional meltdown. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah, like
Okay.
that
Yeah.
like for the Nuggets to come back from like a huge meltdown and like play well and win a game by 30 points. And maybe the Wolves just
Yeah.
relaxed because they were like, wow, we have this team, we crushed them, so whatever. And they just relaxed. So it was probably a bit of both. Obviously the Wolves were flat, but I'm like, I didn't feel like the Nuggets played or the Wolves played so out of character that the Nuggets can't like replicate this. I guess is what I'm trying to hint at. I
Oh,
think it's
yeah,
possible
no.
to keep it up. Whereas I think the Wolves making the Nuggets look like they did in Game Two is probably not going to
Is
happen again in the series. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I sure hope not.
yeah, I hope not. But yes, long Nuggets discussion. That may be the last great Nuggets game of this season. I don't know. Hopefully it's not. I feel pretty positive. I feel like we're going to be fine, but we definitely dug into it because it was a fun game and I'm excited that we won. Let's move on to talking about the rest of the playoffs with some cherry picking, where we'll each talk a little
Cherry
bit about
picking.
some other games going on. So, yeah, why don't you start?
Okay, so anybody who follows me on Twitter knows that I have a beef with basically any team that isn't OKC or Indiana playing small ball, especially relative to your normal lineup. So, for example, the Warriors are a small ball team, but they have some lineups that are smaller than others. In Mavs Thunder, I chose the Dallas Mavericks in this series because I thought that OKC would struggle with the Mavs' size. And there are some interesting dynamics happening in that series, despite Dallas being up 2-1. First, in those first two games, I think that the Thunder did a really good job of keeping, whether it was keeping Dallas off the offensive glass or crashing the offensive glass themselves to just make that margin between the two teams smaller. There are ways that the Thunder, because they are a great team despite being a horrible rebounding team, have countered the way that they lose the possession battle on the glass. One of those is being the best team at turning other teams over, so forcing turnovers. I think they lead the league in steals, both steals per game and steal percentage. All of their players have a really good nose for the ball at the point of attack, and so they give ball handlers a really tough time. They give closeout attackers a really tough time. So they're able to sort of mitigate their limitations size-wise that hurts them in rebounding uh, in being just a really good point of attack defense in that way. However, I chose the Mavs because I thought they're just going to win the glass. OKC was largely either winning that battle in games 1 and 2, even though Dallas won game 2, or uh, actually winning the offensive rebounding battle in those games because they were just they're a small team, but they're pretty athletic and energetic when it comes to winning possessions, whether it is diving for loose balls, steals, and sometimes crashing the offensive glass, even though they're overall not a great offensive rebounding team. However, in this game 3, there was a point in this game where the Dallas Mavericks had a 15-1 edge on the offensive glass. So they had grabbed 15 offensive rebounds and the Thunder had only grabbed one. And the game was tied. So that point in the game sort of tells you how well OKC is able to perform in all of the other categories to mitigate that. Because in any other game where the other team has 15 offensive rebounds on you, no matter how many you have, really, you're probably
Yeah,
down
it's gonna be a
at least,
yeah
a,
rough time.
a substantial margin. But it also told you how Dallas's size was giving OKC trouble. So even though they were able to force misses, and even on some of these offensive rebounding situations, they were able to either recover to the guy who had the ball, so he couldn't just put it back, or recover out to whoever he was passing to. So that even though you got the offensive rebound, you're not getting the second chance points. The Dallas centers, in this case, it's Daniel Gafford is the starting center and Derek Lively, who's a rookie. They were really struggling to help on offense, both in this game and in the other games in this series. I think that they struggled to finish at the rim because of Chet Holmgren's presence, and he's the center on the OKC Thunder. He's been a really great rim protector all season, so that didn't surprise me at all necessarily. But there were other situations where Gafford, in particular, struggled to finish over small players. Like he just has a weird approach to trying to lay the ball in, and whatever. OKC also tagged both Gafford and Lively relatively high on their pick and rolls with Luca, so they were a little further from the basket, so they couldn't just kind of go up and dunk it. Sometimes they would have to try to go for a slightly more creative finish or pass the ball out. But uh, I think Gafford in particular really struggles with decision making when he's in that short roll situation. Eventually in this game, because Gafford was struggling so much, Jason Kidd subs him out for Lively to close the game. And the Mavs went up after they were up 8 or something, and then the Thunder were able to cut the lead to 5. And Jason Kidd was like, "We need to keep scoring." And the Thunder are starting to cut into our lead. But the Mavs were still getting a few stops in a row, even though they were struggling to score on the other side, particularly in the half court. Eventually, when there are 5 minutes left in the game and Dallas is up 5 points, OKC has struggled to score with Derek Lively protecting the rim. He's also been a really good rim protector this season for Dallas. It's why I had him as at least top 4. I don't remember if I had him third for rookie of the year votes, because I just think he's had a really big impact for Dallas, particularly defensively. So with 5 minutes left in this game, the Thunder start the hack a Lively strategy to try to get back in this game. And I don't know if this started, I don't know which centers this started with. I think Hack a Shaq was very popular back when Shaq was playing, because everyone knew he couldn't make free throws, but you also knew you couldn't stop him, and you're behind and you want to try to get back in the game. You start just fouling them every possession and making them go to the free throw line. And hopefully they miss. And often they do, because they're usually not great free throw shooters.
Hey, the Nuggets kind of lived with some of that on Gobert. Just that kind of reminded me, like we had some bad plays where we were letting Gobert
Right.
like
I mean,
slip
you
out, and
should you
you know,
should you should just hack Rudy at the rim, and
yeah,
just because
just
he's
hack him.
just gonna put that up if you were like late on your short roll tag or whatever it is, and he's just under the rim. You should do that. But it's a little different at the end of games when you're like, we need to get back in this before the clutch, or you're in the clutch and you're just like, we need a way to stop the clock and keep giving ourselves chances to score. So what often happens in these situations when the center isn't able to make their free throws is they get subbed out because the team that is up doesn't want to lose their lead. I thought that that was a terrible strategy because Lively had been so impactful defensively. On the very first hack a Lively possession that OKC employs, with lots of time left in the game, 5 minutes, 5 point game, I've never seen OKC resort to this kind of tactic this early in the game. They're not even technically in the clutch yet. Jason Kidd subs out Derek Lively because he missed both free throws. Even though I think he missed both free throws, and then they got it. The Mavs got to stop. And I think the next time down on offense, he either called a timeout or there was a dead ball situation because the ball was knocked out of bounds. Whatever. He subs Lively out. He goes with PJ Washington at the 5. OKC keeps playing the way that they're playing. And so now both teams are playing super small ball, except OKC has a center on the floor. It is Chet Holmgren. So now he's the biggest guy on the floor. And on the very next OKC offensive possession, they get a miss on Shea, and then OKC proceeds to get 3 or 4 offensive rebounds in a row on that possession that ends with a Chet Holmgren putback because the Mavs can't defensive rebound with Derek Lively off the floor, with a center off the floor, because they had neither Gafford nor Lively on at that point. And before that possession even happened, I saw Kidd sub out Lively, and I tweeted out, "Okay, this game is over because the Mavs they're not being serious. Jason Kidd's not being serious right now if you're going to try to play small ball against the best small ball team in the NBA." So on the very next possession, Kidd subs Lively back onto the floor. He's like, okay. Kidd puts Lively back in, and I'm like, you better leave him on the floor. I don't want this offense defense substitution pattern happening. Anyway, Lively helps them get multiple stops down the stretch. It turns into the free throw game. They do the hack a Lively thing a couple more times. On a couple of times, he makes both free throws. On a couple of times, he just makes one of the free throws. And then eventually, the Mavs they're able to hold on and win that game. But I talk about this because I have this beef with coaches who have this urge to find any reason to go small. I actually don't think that Jason Kidd has been this for most of the playoffs. I think it's one of the reasons that the Mavs were able to win the Clippers series, in addition to Kawhi either not being out or not playing like himself at all. But one of the things that the Clippers really struggled with was some of the double big lineups that the Mavs used to counter the Clippers' super small lineups uh, that they were trying to do because they also couldn't score with Gafford or Lively at the rim. So they were like, we need to just open up some space here. And I really appreciated that in round one from Jason Kidd because he's like, we need size on there. And even though their bigs are not the most skilled players, I talked about the struggles that Gafford had in this game, and Lively wasn't that much better on offense. It's one of the reasons that they were struggling to score down the stretch of this game. However, they provide so much value defensively, especially relative to having them off the floor, that it's worth it basically all of the time. And it's one of the things that bugs me about Ty Lue this season. It's the reason I thought that the James Harden trade was so good for the Clippers for most of the season was that his uh, ability as a pick and roll creator at that point guard position was to keep the bigs efficient and involved on offense. Like he always got them in great spots, which made it so that Ty Lue didn't have the excuses to take the bigs off the floor. Like, oh no, our offense is stagnating. Got to get Zubats off the floor, even though he's providing a ton defensively. He's also helping you on offense by offensive rebounding, even if he's not, taking initial shots. And defensive rebounding because the Clippers are a team that struggles to rebound, but even more so when their centers are off the floor, whatever. So this is my rant, my small ball in the Mavs Thunder series rant that I just had to get out there because I don't think that most of the time it's a good idea to try to go super small and try to do this positionless basketball thing, but especially against the best small ball slash positionless basketball team in the NBA, in the OKC Thunder. You are not going to beat them at that game. And I'm glad that Jason Kidd realized that within a possession because it enabled his team to hold on to the lead that they worked so hard to build and win this playoff game.
Is
And
Hack
seeing
Lively coming back up? Is Hack Lively going to come back though?
doing this at the end of the game is just a thing that a lot of teams would do. Doing it with 5 minutes left in that close of a game was less about trying to get back in it, or it was about that, but it was more about playing this guy off the floor. Like we need him off the floor because we can't score with him on the floor. So I saw it more as an admission than a strategy that I think they would employ in like a later game. So yeah, I think Dagnall made a lot of interesting decisions in this game that I didn't necessarily agree with. Chief of which was starting Josh Giddey in both halves. So, you always like give your starters a chance, whatever, every game, even though they're
Yeah.
nuking your spacing, etc. But once you realize, like, okay, this isn't working anymore,
It may be the last we see of Giddy.
it's not going to be.
Damn it,
um,
Mark Dagnall. Get it
The thing
together.
with it is that having to playing Giddy off the floor forces the Thunder to go smaller, which helps their spacing and helps their offense. But it also, unless and Dagnall did try some of this where he would put big Jalen Williams, J. Will on the floor in Giddy's spot, which is something that he doesn't do against most teams. That just tells you how much issue he perceives the Mavs size is giving them. And that's the Mavs without Maxi Kleber right now. This is a PJ Washington slash either Derek Lively or Daniel Gafford front court. And
Mm-hmm.
Dagnall sometimes feels the need to go double big against them. Now they could still win the series. The games the Mavs have won have been close, and I think Shea could play better. I think he's been struggling to get some separation toward the end of the last couple of games because of how the Mavs are overloading on him. And he's missing some, I think, pretty easy passing reads, but they're going to watch film, whatever, get better at that. Especially with Isaiah Joe on the floor in place of them. They have great shooters that are out there that can knock down shots and have been throughout these games. This series in particular, even though it's not like the worst, matchup that OKC could have faced, that kind of pokes at this core issue they have with the size, is shining a light on it in such a way that I think makes me feel good regardless of the outcome of the series. I'm like, I'm not crazy. Like this team is really good, but they do have this really big issue that they need to address. Anyway.
Yes, obviously, I'm not gonna have as much fire and passion about my cherry picking as you had with
You don't have as much fire and
anti-small
passion about
ball.
small ball lineups,
Well, I'm glad
unnecessary
that
small ball lineups.
I've known that you've always hated small ball, or not hated it, but you have your questions about it in certain situations and on certain teams. So I'm
I
glad
have
that
lots
this
of
all came
questions.
back around in this game three for you to
I feel
talk
very
about.
vindicated.
Yes,
And
very
I
nice.
really, even I don't know like what quality of coach Jason Kidd is. I don't follow him enough to know that. And I know Mavs fans have their issues with him, but I
Yeah,
appreciate that through 1.5 rounds of the playoffs, he has been pushing my anti small ball agenda through both his own mistakes in this game for that one possession, but also through the ways that he's been exploiting those mistakes in other teams. In the
yeah.
case of the Clippers.
So I was gonna talk a little Knicks Pacers.
Do it.
Um,
Do it.
it's just interesting to me. It makes me think about that series in comparison with Nuggets Wolves, just because you have a player, or you have these teams who, like the Wolves, who this is their first second round series, and the Knicks,
Yeah.
Brunson's still like a new playoff performer. Like we're learning about what his limits are and how
I mean,
little
he's
there
been in
are.
the playoffs a lot, just not with the Knicks,
Yeah.
right?
Whereas
Because
like a,
he was with the Mavs. He single-handedly won that Jazz series for them when Luca was
mm-hmm.
injured a couple years ago,
Well,
right?
just as like the clear number one, like getting more
Yeah.
chemistry with the rest of his team and playing in these series and seeing what he can do, he's rose to the occasion. And I know there's people who question his ability and being on ball so much. And then similarly, Tyrese, and he has like he's coming off this hamstring injury, and it makes me think of Jamal playing with his calf and trying to adjust your game when you don't have the right burst. And Tyrese looked so much better in game three as far as getting
Yeah,
downhill
he looked
more and
great.
finishing.
He's making his
Whereas,
threes. What did he shoot,
yeah,
like
making his
50% from three
threes.
in that game?
Yeah,
He
it was like
was killing them.
in game one,
Killing them.
Tyrese had a quiet game and the rest of his team played really well. They lost, but the next game he played better. And I feel like, I mean, Siakam just kind of disappeared in the second half in game two.
Yeah.
So it was kind of interesting because OG went off the floor with injuries, and you think Siakam's going to go off now, but he kind of like he was missing everything. He was smoking like every layup. Now he had a much better game. They were creative with him in screening. And the Knicks, I think, like when Brunson was hurt in the game two, OG, they were kind of surviving off of OG just hitting these threes, which was pretty amazing to see.
And
So
attacking mismatches, like stuff that
yeah.
he's been doing in spurts, but it was like a high volume, like, oh, gee, we need you to carry the offense in this really offensively challenged lineup.
Hmm.
Because
And
those
I
bench
just,
minutes were like double big, right? They went with like OG, iHeart, and Precious, and like Josh Hart, and like maybe Deuce at the one. It was like crazy.
with the Knicks' injuries, I don't think many people are taking them to win the finals this year, even though they're really exciting and promising. And I wish everyone was fully healthy. The Pacers, I don't think anyone's picking them either. So it's kind of cool to see these teams getting this experience under their belt and Tyrese kind of learning these lessons where I know he's a little bit injured, but he learning how to be more aggressive and less like facilitating early on, where I feel like he defaults to that sometimes. And it's cool seeing like Jokic had this happen to him in his career. There's been plenty of young players who have these tests in the playoffs and then they learn kind of what is required of them to carry a team to wins in the playoffs. And we kind of touched on young players in the playoffs last episode, but really seeing them learn these lessons live. And I thought it was hilarious that Brunson kind of got punished a little bit for grifting, for his grifting. If it's fair enough for me to call it that, but he had that play
I
where
mean, it is. He is a grifter. That's how I
yeah,
felt as a Heat fan watching him against the Heat last year. He is tough, but
yeah,
also a grifter.
it's kind of like
But
a
so is
debate,
Jimmy. So
the
it
debate
was
with
like
him.
a grift
Yeah,
battle.
right. Well, with like the debate with Joel Embiid, where people were saying he has this great jump shot and he gets to the line a lot in the regular season. Is that going to always carry over into the playoffs? I still wish players finish the play more. Whereas,
Yeah.
I mean, Brunson, him kind of like trying to get the foul and throwing the ball up and then it's a turnover, really came back to bite them in that game. And they cannot lose a game now with OG out. It's just I don't know if they're going to make it out of this series now. And so to almost not like that was the play that they lost the game with, because you had the DiVincenzo goaltending, which was not a good decision, and then you had the amazing Nemhard three, where it was almost like reminiscent of the three that the Knicks hit against the Sixers, where you get that crazy offensive rebound, and then
Yeah, right.
and
Yeah. Or
Tyrese,
reminiscent of the three that Tyrese Maxey hit on the Knicks. That
yeah, that
series
one
was
too,
crazy. The Knicks have been creating two very interesting series because of how
yeah,
I mean, they had their injuries, of course, and now with OG, it's another one, but they've shape shifted a lot. Like you had that game one against the Sixers where it was like, okay, Deuce McBride is just Steph Curry now, can't miss. And he was like plus 37 in a game that went down to the wire.
oh
Like
my
they just
god.
dominated those bench minutes.
Oh, I didn't even talk about net putting Nesmith on
Yeah.
Brunson, which
Aaron Neesmith,
everyone has been
shout him out.
calling. Everyone's been calling for Neesmith to be on Brunson instead of Nemhard, and they did it, and he did it. As good of a job as you can. Brunson still was really good, but you have a better chance with him than Nemhard, which kind of makes the bench chemistry with Nemhard and like McConnell a little weird. I feel like that was a little hard for them to play together, just because they hadn't played many minutes
It's
together.
interesting because you say that, but I think it's interesting because uh Nemhard wasn't starting at the beginning of the year. He was coming off the bench with TJ when Benedict Mathurin before he got injured. And
Yeah,
then they were Buddy was still in the starting lineup. So actually I agree with you that the bench chemistry was kind of weird, but they have played a lot of minutes together, just not recently. Because the
yeah,
starting lineup changed. It was well after the Siakam trade because it was after Buddy got traded too. So Nemhard started starting, especially as they were trying to grow this like defensive identity and they needed like a really defensive minded lead guard in place of either Mathurin, especially after Mathurin got injured and out for the season.
yeah,
But I think
yeah.
those
It's
bench
something to
minutes are
keep an eye on.
very interesting because the Pacers had been soundly winning them
Hmm.
before game three. And then it felt like, and it was largely because of TJ McConnell. He's just making plays on both ends of the floor. I actually feel like Brunson did a better job attacking TJ in this game. Not that he wasn't, but he like TJ's like kind of a weird defender. So Brunson had
Yeah,
to figure some stuff out. But I
yeah, he,
think the whole Knicks team did a much better job of defending TJ in particular in those
yeah,
minutes in this game. So they were able to stay in it that way too, because it could have been a blowout when you look at how those minutes went in the first two games. And then the starters for the Knicks were struggling in this game because Brunson was struggling with Neesmith on him. So it was flip flopped, still a close game at the end, and then the Pacers were the ones that pulled it out because of those big plays they made at the end.
yeah,
But
yeah. It was cool to see. So, yeah, you laid it out perfectly. And do you want to move to this little tiny segment before we head out, where we're gonna rank some of our agendas, our favorite agendas that we personally hold?
yeah, let's
Um,
do it. So, Will and I wanted to rank some of our personal basketball agendas in order of kind of importance. So I'm gonna let Will go first, but these are like here are where our personal biases come from and what we are going to be generally rooting for in any given basketball situation.
Okay, well, the first one I put was the Nuggets at least making the Western Conference Finals, which is very much in question at this point, as the Nuggets are down 2-1, and we know how hard it is for any team to repeat, since we hadn't seen that since the Warriors. So I think it would just speak volumes if the Nuggets just could get past the Wolves, and I believe if we get past the Wolves, we could really repeat. But that said, I don't know how we're gonna, if KP comes back and the Celtics look amazing, and who knows? Who knows what can happen? So hard to predict. But it would say a lot if the Nuggets at least got back to the Western Conference Finals. So I would love to be able to brag about that.
Oh yeah, my number one agenda is all the Jokic legacy points, which is tied into Nuggets succeeding. So them at least making the finals, but ideally winning the championship would be nice. Even though on our last episode I already basically counted them out because they dug this 0-2 hole for themselves against a really good team in the Minnesota Timberwolves. But yeah, that's my number one for sure. Like I'm all about the Jokic legacy points. Give me the MVPs. Give me
Yeah, I want it
the
all.
yeah, we've beaten these great teams. Yeah, we've dominated this Hall of Fame defender and this Hall of Fame defender, and they took down LeBron James twice now, one in a sweep, one in a gentleman's sweep. It's just all going on the resume.
My second agenda that I had was anti-Warriors, which was completed this season since the Splash Brothers Draymond Green configuration has officially been destroyed.
It was a really epic collapse. It was really sad.
It was. But now that I have distance from it and feeling a little bit bad for them, I'm completely enjoying it with glee. Um,
Now that you have distance from it, you're not enjoying you're enjoying it now. You weren't enjoying it
yeah,
before.
I felt a little bit bad for them in the moment, I'm not gonna lie. I did. So they kind of ruined it for me how like sad they all looked. But I think like there was a report that the Warriors are looking to trade Draymond. I don't know how uh reliable that rumor was or not, but I would be shocked if the Warriors don't look pretty different next season. Clay's going to be on the Magic, 100% guarantee. So sorry.
Oh my
Um,
gosh. I saw something today that the Magic were reportedly looking to trade for Brandon Ingram, and I'm like, "Oh my god, I'd rather have
whoa.
Clay."
It,
And I don't
it
even want Clay on the team.
This is actually funny because when we did the shot clock violation where we were naming where players were going to end up, and
Yeah.
I got Brandon Ingram and I said the Warriors, and I was like, I don't know why I thought the Pelicans would, get rid of Brandon Ingram, but now there's all these reports that like they're probably going to move on from Brandon Ingram, and I was like, oh, I
Yeah.
guess okay, maybe I'll be right about that. Anyway, do you want to go with your next one?
So your anti-Warriors number two. My number two has to be Jamal. And the thing with my Jamal legacy stuff is it's really like a 1B to the Jokic slash Nuggets legacy stuff. So one of the things I told somebody on Twitter the other day, that this was somebody who said that they would be upset. It's a Nuggets fan who said they'd be upset about anyone else winning the title that wasn't the Nuggets except the Cavs. And I said, no way. I can't have Donovan Mitchell getting a finals MVP before Jamal. So
uh,
that told me that Jamal is my number two agenda. And I said it's a 1B because even though I want Jokic to win all of the finals MVPs associated with Nuggets championships, I wouldn't be like super upset if Jamal won one. I would prefer if it was like a Western Conference Finals MVP, then Jokic gets the Finals MVP. So we're building up those legacy points, very important. But
mhm.
still got the championship, whatever, a la Tim Duncan, where you get like a Tony Parker Finals MVP, but all of those chips are on Timmy. So Jamal's my number two, and part of it is related to um, I'll just talk about my next agenda because my anti Suns agenda is sort of tied into this. I don't like the Phoenix Suns. And I didn't have great feelings about Devin Booker before I became a Nuggets fan, but I have supremely negative feelings about Devin Booker after I became a Nuggets fan, just because that whole Suns rivalry is like has been a little bit of a thing ever since the Suns like started making the playoffs for the first time in forever a few years ago. So the Jamal agenda is sort of tied into Jamal racking up more and better legacy points than Devin Booker, which is tied to me being anti Suns for reasons having to do with Devin Booker and not having to do with Devin Booker. Like the fact that I've always hated Chris Paul is so annoying.
Yeah, he's
So that was like
annoying.
it was a really natural fit for me to dislike the Phoenix Suns starting last year. And even though Chris Paul's not on that team anymore, it's just like, nope, bad taste in my mouth, hate all of it. So I'm rooting for their downfall. And even though the Wolves, at least by the series score, were kicking the Nuggets' butts in round two, I was not really upset that they swept the Phoenix Suns at all.
Yeah, I wanted it to be more of a series just for to tire either team out, but obviously that didn't happen. Yeah, we both got both of our most hated teams like they lost in such horrible fashion, so that was good for us. Um, my third agenda is the foul grifting, which um, I really want to advocate for any of you fans who really love complaining about the refs. to keep it up because a lot of people will demonize talking about the refs because it's kind of a lame conversation to have, which I get because it's like you can't really control anything. Why are we talking about the refs? Like sometimes you get calls, sometimes you don't. What are you going to do? NBA fans have been required to look past officiating for pretty much forever in order to enjoy the game because
They've been
other
required.
yeah, it's like if you're gonna watch NBA, you gotta watch it and just enjoy the game and try your best not to get upset at the refs and just accept that it's very hard to officiate basketball and it's never gonna be perfect and it just is what it is. It's part of the game. But I'm hoping that some rules will be changed. Obviously, we've had things change in the past, like the jumping into the defender thing, which still people kind of get away with these days. But I would love to see less grifting happen where it's obvious when players are just going in for the foul and getting it and not being rewarded with it. I think it should just be a no call and just say tough. You guys
No,
just
you
make
want
a
to take a
basket.
shot that you want to flail your body and take a shot like that? All right,
Yeah.
you better make it.
I don't think it's ever going to
Yeah.
happen, but I will keep demonizing grifting when I can. Yes. So you want to go with your. Speaking of grifting, your next agenda works out perfectly.
Oh my gosh, my anti-Sixers agenda? That ties
Yeah.
in, that does tie in perfectly. I had no specific feelings about the Philadelphia 76ers before last year. Just were not a team that I followed even casually. After watching them against the Boston Celtics, and part of it had to do with sort of, well, now I'm pro Jokic, so I'm going to be anti Embiid, but this will tie into my last agenda, but I had no problem rooting against the Boston Celtics in that series. But as it progressed, it was so clear that Harden and Embiid, and unfortunately now Tyrese Maxey, who even though I still have generally positive feelings about him as a player overall, he's adopting a lot of those same grifting tactics used by Embiid and Harden, and now some like Jason Tatum tries, but he's not as good at it. He uses the same athletic trainer as Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. So they're all trying to do all these grifty moves instead of just playing basketball. I think it distracts them from becoming better basketball players, frankly. I think there were moments in this series against the Knicks in round one where they got punished for trying those moves. There were other times when they did get the call, but I was very happy to watch their downfall because I just don't like the way that they play basketball for the most part. And it's funny because I felt like at the beginning of this season, I remember watching their season opener against the Bucks, and I was like, "Oh, they're just playing really good basketball now under Nick Nurse. There's a lot of motion, a lot of cutting, a lot of passing, just ball movement, and everyone's just playing basketball." It was great. Of course, as the season progresses, and yeah, Embiid had his injury midseason. Season progresses, they get Kyle Lowry on the team. So, like we talked about in a previous episode, there's just this grifty culture there where they are just constantly trying to trick the refs, and all those same habits, old habits, start to set back in. And then they just weren't playing that same brand of basketball against New York, and they got punished for it. And it was really nice to see because yeah, I don't like when teams that play bad basketball are rewarded for it, which
Yeah.
is why the Suns and Sixers are right next to each other.
Is it too much to ask that I just want to see some basketball? I know I sound like an old person when I say this, but it's like
What happened to the game I love?
I just don't want to see grifting. It's boring. I don't want to see it. All right. So my next one is kind of similar to the Suns hate, where I love talking about how big threes are way out of style, and it's not just about getting three all stars together and putting them on a team, and it means instant championship. Thankfully, the LeBron teams, the LeBron Heat, which when you think back to them, they were like so stacked. It wasn't even like a big three. They were ridiculous. So I don't know how they didn't win more championships.
The good teams were, but their supporting cat. I'll tell you how. It was Mario Chalmers. Like when you have Mario Chalmers decision making coming off the bench, and
Yeah, it's
LeBron
pretty
has to sit
bad.
there and watch him make decisions with the ball. That's how you lose. That's how
Yeah.
you lose in the playoffs.
But I'm really loving like the NBA mostly having two really good all-star level or all NBA kind of players and then a bunch of nice role players around them who are winning, I mean, I'm kind of over the Wolves right now, but you have Nars Reed, sixth man of the year. The Nuggets, they had a Bruce Brown. Like, you have these cool players who, they have smaller, medium contracts who are really bringing something off the bench and are bringing a lot of production. I like that. So, yeah, I love the death of the big three, which stemmed from the Warriors, me hating that big three, which ended up being a big four, which is completely absurd. So, good riddance to that. And speaking of that, your next agenda.
Oh, I'm next. Sorry. I thought you were going to do
Your
your
next
last one.
your next agenda kind of relates to mine. I don't know that
Big
you could
threes.
argue
Yeah.
it's a big three, but people have been arguing
They're
whether it's a
not.
super
They're
team.
not. My anti-Celtics agenda, I will say, has nothing to do with substance. With other teams that I talked about, I didn't like that they were rivals with my favorite teams. I didn't like that their players were rivals with my favorite players. I didn't like their play style. With the Celtics, I have no specific thing that I dislike about them except the fact that they have Derek White and we don't. But I was born in South Florida. I was raised in South Florida. I followed the Miami Heat and LeBron. I followed LeBron basically his whole career. And the Boston Celtics, they have been my mortal enemy because they were LeBron's mortal enemy in that Eastern Conference. I guess, if I had anything of substance to say about this particular team, they just don't have the same like swagger of that '08 Celtics team. I was a big fan of Rondo back in the day too, just watching him operate. This Celtics team is fine. Like, they play good basketball. They play as a team. When they play like good defense and stuff, they have a fun five out style. I don't trust their like clutch or half court offense or whatever. I think that they are a more fun offense to watch than they have been in previous years because of the fact that they do um, a lot of this five out stuff in a way. I actually think I like watching them better without Kristaps because I like watching him try to post up is kind of an eyesore. Yeah, everything else about the team is, a-okay. Super athletic. They're fast. Derek White is good. I hate it, but I don't hate watching it unless it's against us. But yeah, they are definitely there. It's one of those things where, well, if you're playing the Celtics and you're not on my agenda list, I'll probably root for you against the Celtics just because, but I don't have any particular animus towards
Hmm.
Boston.
Man, if the Nuggets get eliminated, I will have literally zero teams that I want to win. So
Well,
I
if
may,
we get eliminated by the Wolves, I will want the Wolves to win because I don't want the Celtics to win, and I want to be able to say that at least we lost to the eventual champions.
I guess so. I don't know. There's still a part of me that cannot accept Wolves winning the championship, but I'll deal with that when we get there. I am very close to putting like the Jason Tatum is overrated agenda on my list, but I need him
I
to like
don't even
actually
know if
lose
it's like like a thing that you have to talk about anymore though. Like, I
because
think
it's
a
just
lot of people are
accepted.
starting to feel that way. He's had a
Hmm.
really slumpy like post All-Star break stretch. He's like a good basketball player, but he's just not the guy that they've been trying to like ram down our throats for the last however many years as like this top 5 player. Um he's just like really good, and I think he'd be a killer number 3 somewhere and like a
Oh man,
really, really good like
yeah,
2A
that's
somewhere.
true. He could be
Uh,
like a Michael Porter Jr. for somebody else.
yeah, and he does a lot of things well. He's a good spot up shooter, great rebounder. He can drive closeouts, all this stuff. He can make good decisions on drives sometimes when he's not the one that the defense is keying in on, but he is on this Celtics team, and it might not matter because they have Derek White.
Yeah.
So
So my last agenda though is there was someone who put out, I forget this person's name and I'm so sorry, but somebody put out like a little article on their Substack that was about how Jokic is a MVP since the NBA ABA merger that's had the least help, and he counted up like all NBA awards and All Star awards and all these things and totaled them and how many championships these other players have won. And Jokic is still early on in his career, but he's already won a championship and 3 MVPs to this point. So it's kind of interesting looking at his roster and seeing who he's had to play with. Obviously, Denver's a smaller market, so they haven't been getting big name free agents in Jokic's era in Denver, but we've had some cool trades like getting AG and getting Paul Millsap, etc. But I'm not trying to like diss on the Nuggets and the rest of the Nuggets and say, wow, the Nuggets are so bad and Jokic has carried them, because I really love the starting five and I love how they highlight the idea of getting players who fit well together versus like just putting a bunch of really good players together who have all NBA awards. I think Jamal and AG and MPJ and KCP can all get all star awards and all defense awards. So I think they're of that caliber. So that's why a lot of fans roll their eyes when you try and say, like, look at what Jokic has played with. These people don't win the awards. And they say, well, they should win the awards. There's just not enough to go around. But then it's like, okay, well, they didn't win the awards. So I think he is like one of the best optimizers ever, though. So maybe that's more my slant, is like, look at the ways in which Jokic optimizes everyone around him. So yeah, that's my last piece.
I'm fine with it. I am all about twisting facts for personal agendas, which is
Yeah.
like that kind of stuff goes on my number one Jokic legacy agenda anyway. So I completely
Ooh.
understand what you mean. Like in the
Yeah.
same breath, I'll say Jamal is better than your favorite All Star, but also say like Jokic has never played with well, he's played with Paul Millsap, but since he started winning MVPs, he's the only MVP who hasn't
Mm-hmm.
won or played with another All Star.
Yes. One of my agendas for sure, which I didn't talk about, what is that Jokic is going to be a top three player of all time at least, right behind LeBron and MJ. That's mine, but it's early for that, so I'm not really going to go. But in my mind, I'm like, he's going to get there eventually. He just needs the rings, the ring culture, whatever.
Well, the
Um,
rings are tough as
yeah,
we're seeing.
yeah. He may not get all those rings, but I know like what he brings, his impact. He's insane. So I know that he can get there. Just like, I mean, I feel like Dirk's single championship went a long way towards his legacy, and I feel like people aren't giving Jokic that same kind of respect right now. But whatever.
I think a lot
Later
of
on.
people put Yoke on that Dirk kind of tier. Like a lot of the like
Well,
where you rank him that I've heard from, national media has whatever. He's like plus or minus wherever they have Dirk, plus or minus like two places
hmm,
of where they
these
have
are
Dirk. So I think he's like on that level.
these are
But I'd
smart.
like him to like pass the Hakeem Olajuwon level.
Yeah, I feel like serious journalists and NBA analysts are doing that, but I feel like the regular fans are like, he got lucky that he won even one ring.
What regular fans? Who are you
Normal
talking to?
fans on. I come from NBA Twitter, the trenches of
No, I
NBA
know.
Twitter.
You have way more followers than me. I don't know what kind of people you're interacting with out
I've
there,
also
but I
been
don't know
like
anybody. I
arguing
know
with.
like random haters of like that are fans of other teams try to say that, but
Yeah,
it's not usually in
exactly.
reference to like where Yoke ranks all time. Like those people aren't usually having that conversation because they're thinking too much about how much their own team sucks.
Or like all the debates I had with people about Shaq. Like I was saying, Jokic has already passed Shaq, in my
Oh my
opinion. So
gosh. We didn't talk about that. We have to talk
yeah,
about this. So Jokic won his third MVP this season. We actually didn't talk about it. I think it was announced like the night after our last show. Big news. It was announced on
yeah.
TNT.
Congrats to Jokic.
Congrats to
Woo.
Jokic. The Nuggets media people and his family collaborated to do a couple of really nice, segments and congratulatory pieces. His wife did a nice narration of like his story. It was great. They announced the MVP on TNT on Inside NBA, and Chuck was congratulating Jokic. Shaq comes in, and like first thing he says to Yoke is like, "Hey, just so you know, like I thought it should have been Shea. I thought he had the best season. Blah blah blah." And Jokic is like on his headset because it's on satellite and whatever he's talking. He's like, well, there were a lot of deserving candidates. Whatever. I wonder how he felt in that moment. But anyway, the next day, Shannon Sharp, either on his podcast or maybe
Yeah.
it was on
It
his
was
podcast.
it was like
He
his
talks
night
about
podcast, whatever that is.
he talks about this meme that had been kind of going around NBA Twitter. I don't know if he saw this at all. I thought we were joking when we talked about how Shaq had kind of been on the anti Jokic MVP train this season. He had been very publicly backing Shea and saying that he's like, I think he's had the best season and kind of like being a little bit shady toward Jokic's regular season performance this season, which has not been our issue at all. He's been great. He's, I think, had a really great MVP case. I have no problem with thinking that Shea should have won MVP. I just think it was weird what Shaq did. But Shannon Sharp also thought that, and he went on his podcast and said that Shaq only did that because he was jealous. Now, I'm about to read the post that Shaq had on his Instagram. It was a picture of I think it was a picture of Shannon Sharp like in his like football uniform or something. And here's the caption. It's a very long rant for an Instagram caption, but here goes. By Shaq. You took me sticking up for Shay as jealousy of Joker. Shows how smart you are and how you say anything to get clicks. So here's some clickbait for you. If you ain't ranked me in the top 10 in your if you ain't ranked in the top 10 of your profession, then you can't speak on me. Don't forget, I know what you did to get where you at. Me jealous sounds like you jealous. I know you're trying to stay relevant by gossiping on your podcast. We don't believe you. You need more people. And in case you forgot, 4 rings, 3 finals MVPs, top 50 and top 75. It's top 50 and top 75. Well, Google me. And to be quite frank, all this new success you got, you still under me. You don't know my work ethic, but according I work less than you, but I'm worth more than you. Make it make sense. Love you too. If you need help making money, it's better ways than gossiping. I'm too old for this shit. And yet he's posting on Instagram. Love always, the most dominant big man ever who never took it serious. Remember, I don't know you. And in the words of Skip Bayless, I'm better than you. Hashtag G14 classification. I have it, you don't. Not in my profession. And your GOAT debate never wanted to be the GOAT. I wanted to be who you should greet me as. All caps, the most dominant ever.
Well, first of all, Skip Bayless didn't say I'm better than you. Richard Sherman said it, so he
Was
needs to
it?
get
Okay, so he didn't
needs to
even
get his
get that
facts
right.
straight. But
Anyway, I was pretty
yeah,
shocked when I saw this. It was a screenshot going around. I went and I checked Shaq's Instagram. He actually said this, and it was under, like I said, a picture of Shannon from back in the day, from when Shannon played football. I found it fascinating because it really does feel now like Shaq is feeling insecure about his legacy. And I'm like, relative to Jokic, like, dude, you three-peated. Like, what are you actually afraid of?
because the actual stats and numbers, such a good case for Jokic, in my opinion. But yeah, the three-peat. I mean, Jokic didn't play with Kobe Bryant. Like Shaq wasn't shooting threes. It wasn't. I don't know. I
Uh,
it's whatever.
Yeah,
It
but Shaq didn't have to shoot threes to three-peat.
Yeah, it was a different era.
No
But
one
I
could
know
stop
he
him.
couldn't shoot threes. I don't know. I'm being a little.
He couldn't shoot free throws.
The Shaq Diesel doth protest too much, right? It's like, why are
Yeah.
you? If you really aren't jealous, then why are you even entertaining this and acting so angry about it?
He made Yoke the vice chairman of the Big Man Alliance.
Yeah,
Like,
he's allowed to like think someone else should win an MVP, but it wasn't a good time for him to bring it up. It was
no.
definitely a bad look. So
And he said it all snarky, and he had been basically for the last 2 months, every time somebody brought up Jokic possibly winning the third MVP. And it's like, yeah, fine, have your opinion. There are other people who have had that opinion that weren't saying it like that. It was just like this
yeah,
it was interesting, is all I have to say. You
just
know,
like read the room, read the moment, let him have his moment. He just joined like a very exclusive club, and he's like talking about SGA. Like it was so like beyond the scope of what that moment was. But yeah, just a bad look overall.
yeah, Shaq off protest too much, as you say. But anyway, that was fun to share.
Yes.
Maybe our viewers have their own thoughts on Shaq's comments and his subsequent Instagram post after somebody kind of called him out on it.
I think Jokic with his third MVP, I would be very surprised if he ever won again. So I'm very happy to finally get this third MVP, which I believe he deserved last season. I know it's a whole other discussion, but I'm really happy that he has it now, and I can live it in peace knowing that he got his three MVPs. Now we just need the final MVPs and the rings. So let's hopefully get that. And
Let's go get it. Let's move
w-
up in those legacy talks.
hopefully we will be getting the second one this season if the Nuggets can figure out how to get out of this series. So we will be back talking about the next games in the series, and hopefully they go well. And if you've listened to us, we thank you so much. Hopefully we have good news for you next time you tune in, no matter what team you support. But please remember to like, subscribe, share, retweet us on Twitter, hit the notification bell, leave reviews, comment if you like. We're always on Twitter. Follow us, come talk to us. We interact with as many people as we can. And remember, winning is fun and losing sucks.
Winning is so fun.